Live from the living room. I just took a horrible selfie for the thumbnail because I was shaking the camera, and then I was like, "Oh, it looks kind of artsy, kind of like I painted it." So I'll leave that as it is. Zero people watching right now, but you know, I do these things live so people can listen to them later. Just taking a quick break from doing my notes. And what I wanted to get out of my brain and just put out into a video is another exploration of a concept that I've come across as an atheist and a therapist, speaking with colleagues who are not atheists but are also therapists. But speaking about something that is outside of the scope of therapy, being support groups. Now, uh, I recently, in the company of a bunch of colleagues, spoke on the anecdote of how, in certain situations, I, as an atheist, working for public uh, agencies, agencies getting government funding from grants, agencies billing Medicaid, you know, connected to the government in some way, working hand in hand with the government on certain projects, um, having agreements with those governments. Still, as an atheist, I've been uh, forced to do things that would be against my religious beliefs, one of which being having to attend 12 step groups, AA meetings in particular, but also uh, NA meetings, CA meetings, CMA meetings, stuff like that. Because, there's the prayer at the end. That's always fun. The serenity prayer where I don't really want to repeat it, but, I feel like it's at least a good message in it. But I'm really just wanting to look up and see who else is looking up. Like that little time at Thanksgiving dinner when atheists can find each other. Like, oh, we're the ones that don't bow all the way. We actually have the balls to look up and see who else is looking. Anyways, um, I've had to chaperone 12 step meetings because either the 12 step organization has an H&I group, hospitals and institutions group, and they send a group to the institution to run a 1 hour AA meeting or whatever A it is. Um, there's a bunch of A's in the world. You know, whatever fucking A is for you, you go ahead and do that fucking A, right? So they send these people to residential facilities, to detoxes, to hospitals and stuff. They run an AA meeting in that facility, prisons, jails, homeless shelters, and then they leave and they go on to their next assignment. And there's some people who run multiple groups like that in a day. But also, I've been in residential facilities where I had to, grab the keys to the company van and drive a bunch of clients to a meeting and had to be there just to make sure that they all stayed there and also that they weren't, using while they were supposed to be there, like ditching out and then, just coming back at the end. I had to actually stay and watch that they were there the whole time. And so I was subjected to a bunch of ideas that, you know, are incompatible with my uh, feelings on religion. But in my times uh, dealing with 12 step group ideology, both listening to it in practice, watching people recite parts of it, and reading their literature, I think the worst thing that I've come across as far as how I feel like it's incompatible with evidence based treatment is that the idea that you have to admit that you are powerless over your drugs is incompatible with me from a strengths based approach in counseling, saying that you actually do have the ability to change yourself for the better. You know, I'm trying to empower somebody, and here's a whole system of beliefs that says like, no, you don't have the power. You have to rely on the power of this group or a higher power. You know, you have to pick some other power. You don't have the power within you, and that's an argument that doesn't need to be. You know, when I'm at a facility that's being funded by government funds, I don't expect to have to argue that you know my job is not to lead people to a belief in a deity so that they can get off drugs. My job is to use actual evidence based therapeutic techniques as a therapist to help people stop using drugs as an addiction counselor. So that's my biggest beef with it, right? Now, of course, I've got a bias that, I don't like programs that include that spirituality component because I'm an atheist. I admit that. And if it were just that bias, it would be really easy for me to say, well, the client, being a religious person, still would benefit from that program. Just send them on to it. But when it tears down a lot of the other things that evidence based therapy is trying to do, then I get really upset. You know, and the thing is, just like the Bible, but with, you know, only a lot of decades behind it, the Big Blue Book, it doesn't get revised with the nuances of our newer understanding of, you know, addiction through science. So it doesn't grow. Its ideas are, I think, 90 years old. You know, 90 years ago, what was science like, especially psychology? That's what we're working with that book. Um, a lot of moralistic approach to things, whereas, you know, most therapists have a biopsychosocial uh, lens that they're looking through without the judgment of that morality that comes from a lot of the uh, spiritual dogma that surrounds 12 step groups. But what I was telling my colleagues, as I was telling them how I often have to bite my tongue and just do what's best for the client, or just do what my agency would want me to, because my being an atheist is often not in line with what they want out of their workers. Many places have statements of faith that they want you to sign in order to be able to work somewhere. I will never work at Catholic charities. I will never work at a St. Mary's hospital. I will never work at the rescue mission uh, brand of homeless shelters that are all over the country because the neon sign that says Jesus saves. There are jobs for therapists for those homeless people that I'm never going to have because I will never sign that statement of faith. You know, so it is kind of a challenge where a good 10% of the jobs that are out there are kind of off limits to me, and then I'd say another half of the jobs, it's implied either by the agency being uh, funded partially by religious organizations or you just having a religious boss. You just don't want to piss off your boss. So, having had to experience so many 12 step groups from the perspective of I'm not there for me, I've had a lot of time to analyze what works about 12 step groups because they wouldn't be around this long if they weren't doing something right. So I've said this previously on my channel, uh, probably 2 or 3 times, but fellowship is their biggest power, I think. um, it's just that many people who are addicts have burned all their bridges and have nowhere else to go where people are uh, universally accepting, unconditionally giving you positive regard. You know, so going to these groups, you're going to have warm people who are trying to stab you in the back and judge you, um, which is weird because if churches just practiced what they preached, they'd be doing a lot more forgiveness and redemption. But you see that more in AA meetings with addicts than you do in churches. So they've got to go to those kinds of meetings. And so when they do, they find that place where they can feel comfortable and feel loved again. That's the power of AA. The tenets of AA, the steps and the traditions, there's a lot in them that is not congruent with modern techniques with psychotherapy, modern modalities for therapy. But there are some good parts of it, like when people are doing the service component of AA, where they have to serve others, it actually is empowering, unlike the part where they have to admit that they're powerless. After being broken down, they're built back up. That's a good part. But I still wish that I could get around having to use referrals to AA groups. Many times just not there's not any program that has any funding that I can send somebody to because you know money and insurance coverage and the way that the world works. But I do if it's in the interest of that client, I will send them to wherever they need to go. So have, having told this to some colleagues recently, um, one of them said that there's another aspect of the positive benefits of that spiritual component that maybe I was ignoring. And that is through attachment theory. So people who hit rock bottom, many of them have had horrible backgrounds where they've been abused by people, used by people, even as addicts. Maybe they've done some of the abusing of other people, and they've been abused back. You know, uh, horrible childhoods correlate to it, whatnot. Um, if you are healing your attachment trauma with the addition of spirituality in your life, you could be inserting the idea of this uh, God that is always there and always loves you perfectly, right? And that could start to help you heal attachment trauma. That was how it was posed to me from my colleague. But remember now, I'm looking at this from the perspective of somebody who's personally an atheist. And what I'm feeling is it's a recipe for disaster if they were to ever become an atheist. Now, if they were an atheist before going to that 12 step meeting, and then it was just shoehorned onto them, that whole religion component just kind of snuck in the back door. They came for help with their addiction and they leave with a Bible. If it's like that, then maybe they might be a little bit more prone to relapse into that non religious state than if they were indoctrinated for their entire life to believe that God exists. Why would you ever question it? But it, to me, with the perspective that God is a false idea, if you are basing the healing of your trauma on this false idea, as soon as you realize that it is a false idea, you are potentially setting yourself up for even more hurt. You know, especially for those of us who have had the trauma of realizing uh, that invisible friend that you keep around called Jesus wasn't ever actually there. That was just you talking to yourself, maybe. You know, and so maybe you had a lot of courage through some things that maybe you shouldn't have had courage through. You know, it can be scary when you think, oh my goodness, maybe I shouldn't have let Jesus take the wheel then. You know, because if he's not real, then that's just stupid to take your hands off that steering wheel. So I feel like I do have to concede that if somebody were able to maintain the facade that God was real and actively loving them, that perhaps they could use that as a substitute for the love that they never got from their actual physical parents, and maybe start to heal all the abuse that they've had in their life. Yes, but it just leaves me very afraid for that person that one day that they pray for something really really hard, that they feel like if God was just, he would absolutely give them that day that they pray really hard and don't get what they're praying for. That little bit of doubt will start to slip in. And I just fear that when they lose their faith in that God, that those wounds will just rip right open because you're patching up parts of their their psyche with lies. You know, at least we're like 2 weeks out from the election, and I'll get a little bit of a reprieve before the next political cycle happens because uh, trying to live in a largely theistic world as an atheist is kind of like having clients in your group counseling sessions that have political beliefs that are different than the other clients. And, you know, you can see the microaggressions of people trying to make points that you would only make if you were of a certain political persuasion to try to take up all the air in the room so that anybody who was of the other political persuasion would feel uncomfortable. And I'm ready for that cycle to restart and you know, see the first year of that 4 year cycle all over again so that I don't know, maybe we can actually get back to thinking about what's wrong with us, why we're here, rather than things that are external, things that are outside of you, me, and the four walls here. You know, maybe we could start working on us. That's how I feel right now. Anyways, that's it for my ramble today. See you guys soon.